Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K Collector coming at you on a cool Monday evening. I tried something a little unique today. So this is a PAL PlayStation 1 game, and I'm not going to be able to get my PAL PlayStation out of storage until tomorrow. I wanted to get some footage of Rapid Reload for you. This is a very rare, probably the rarest game in my collection. It's an extremely rare PlayStation 1 game. This was only released in the UK as well as Japan, I believe. And this is pretty much a run and gun side-scrolling shoot 'em up style game. Think Gunstar Heroes. The Japanese version of this game is called Gunner's Heaven. And I'm really excited to play this one. I really am. This is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, genre of games right there. I mean, run and gun shoot 'em ups are right there with space shoot 'em ups, as well as beat 'em ups. Those are like my favorite genres. Right behind that would be like hack and slash. So, but in any event, I got a little impatient and I just wanted to see what would happen if I put this game inside my PlayStation 3, because from what I understand, I know not all PlayStation 3s can play PlayStation 2 games. I think you have to have a backwards compatible one. But from what I understand, all PlayStation 3s can play PlayStation 1 games, if I'm not mistaken. So someone can let me know down in the comments. But I tried to put this PAL PlayStation 1 game into my system, and I got this cool little message here, letting me know that this disc has region restrictions. So yeah, it's a good thing I kept that PAL PlayStation. Otherwise I would not be able to play this game. I had checked a few message boards and a few forums, and I even read a few comments where people were saying that it doesn't matter if it's NTSC or PAL. You can play a PAL game on either an NTSC or a PAL system, or a Japan system, but that's not the case. I was able to play North American games on my PAL system, but they weren't really running right. The initial PlayStation startup screen was like delayed and flickering. The music wasn't playing clearly, so there was definitely something off, and I'm assuming that has something to do with the difference in gigahertz or megahertz. You guys can let me know all that technical babble down in the comments below. I don't really get too thick into the weeds with that stuff. I try to know enough to make sure that it works, because I'm more interested in the gameplay. But yeah, Rapid Reload is definitely, like I said, one of the rarest games in my collection, probably the rarest. There are a lot of copies of Gunner's Heaven out there. There's way more copies of that out there than there are copies of Rapid Reload. And unfortunately, my copy is missing the complete insert. It does have an authentic manual, which I am pretty stoked about. I am glad that the manual is official and that the manual is there. I'm not even gonna take it out, but I'm glad for that. But as I was thinking about, the game and the rarity and just my collection and some of the rare pieces in my collection, I started to think about a topic that I had been discussing earlier, which was collecting for different consoles, right? And what you see here are representations of the third and fourth generation of pretty much 16-bit and 8-bit gaming. And right now, these are some of the more rare generations and harder generations to collect for, just because a lot of the games from these generations are more expensive. Now, when it comes to like the Nintendo Mini, the Super Nintendo Mini, and the Genesis Mini, those consoles are very, I would say, family friendly, more balanced minis that will give you a good balance of games. They all have roughly around 40 games on them a piece, give or take about 5 games. I don't remember the exact numbers. But the Sega Genesis 2 Mini 2 is definitely more niche. I would say the Sega Genesis Mini, along with the Neo Geo Mini, and even the TurboGrafx 16 Mini, which I don't have here because that's in storage. I do have that brand new. That was the one mini that I never opened. But these minis are definitely more niche. They have a lot more of those hidden titles, a lot more of like the shoot 'em ups, the beat 'em ups, to like the arcade classics that you probably never heard about. That's what those are for, and they've got some amazing titles on that. And I keep these because of, one, I don't always want to have to dive into my physical copies of all my games. These are great ways to just play the games, especially the Neo Geo Mini. I think they did a great job with the sprite scaling, especially on the Genesis Mini 2 and the Neo Geo Mini. I think they did a great job with those two. But I'm trying to think about what I'm going to do with my collection, especially that portion of my collection. And as I was thinking about, the collecting and my collection, collecting is very funny. There's a show on Netflix that pretty much follows, Golden Auctions, which is a big auction site where they sell all types of collectibles, baseball cards and everything like that. And, as a collector, the hobby of collecting, the industry of collecting, it's really a big play on your emotions, right? I think every collector has an emotional attachment to the games that they collect. And, that emotion could be just purely nostalgia driven. But there's a lot of emotion when it comes to collecting. And there's a danger in that. And I'll talk about that in a second. But there's another side to collecting, which is very much like gambling. There's very much a gambling aspect to collecting, or the same emotions that you get from gambling, which is pretty much a dopamine hit, right? When you look at like, and I'm going somewhere with this if you'll stick with me, but when you look at folks who do like the whole baseball card collecting, when you buy a big box of random baseball cards in hopes that you will, somehow get a very rare card, it's the same feeling that you get from like pulling a slot machine, right? You don't know what's coming. You've spent a set amount of money. Something's in there, but you don't know if anything that's in there is going to be worth anything. And you're kind of met with this anticipation. It's like this excitement that builds up. And if you do happen to hit and get a really valuable card, then that dopamine is rushing in, and you're charged, you're happy because you feel like you won something, and you want to do it again. And sometimes collecting can be that way too. When you rush into a Goodwill, when you rush into, a Salvation Army, when you rush into a thrift store, or even GameStop for that matter, you walk in and you don't know what you're going to see on the shelf. And there are days where you walk in and you find absolutely nothing. It's nothing but a bunch of off-brand Wii Sports games or, Word Jong, or, Math Blaster or something like that, But then there are some days where you walk in and you find a very rare or valuable game just sitting right there on the shelf, complete in box, looking brand new. And it's that same dopamine hit. And it's these two aspects of collecting, right? The nostalgia side, the emotion side, and then the gambling dopamine side that can make it very dangerous for folks who may or may not be able to control themselves. But I think it's also those two aspects that do make collecting and just a hobby a viable industry. I hear a lot of people leave comments on different videos, and even on my videos, they talk about the people who buy video games and, hoard them, thinking that they'll be able to retire on them one day. You know what? If I were to be completely honest, there are some people who might be able to retire on their collection one day, whether you like it or not. There are people who have games in their collection that are substantial enough, or there are people who have substantial enough collections that if they were to decide to liquidate one day and turn those games into cash, those games would in fact give them enough cash to retire, to buy property, to buy things. There are people who have collections right now that if they were to decide to liquidate their collections, they could go and buy a house. They could go and invest in the stock market. They could go and do a bunch of things with that money. So, um, you know, I'm not going to sit here and act like there isn't that, um, financial side or that financial aspect to collecting, because that's a real thing. And it's the emotions that people have to these video games, the emotional ties that they have, the nostalgia that they have, as well as the dopamine aspect of it that does in fact make it a viable business. It does make it a viable hobby. It makes it a viable investment. And I tell you what, if it wasn't, GameStop wouldn't be getting into it. If retro games and retro game collecting weren't important, GameStop would not care. And I know that they've tried it in the past before and maybe it didn't work, but the attention and the fan service and the community that has formed around this hobby has just been too strong to ignore. And I think you've got people who are on both sides of the fence, people who remember a time when you could probably go and get a lot of these games that are seen as super rare, and get them for pennies on the dollar. And I think some people think back and I think they kick themselves for not taking advantage in the past and not being able to either keep games that they had or buy more games when they were cheaper. You have people who look at the hobby that way, and I think they get a little bitter. But that's like the same thing as a guy who didn't invest in Google, but back when Google first started, and now they're kicking themselves because they should have invested in Uber. I mean, sorry, not Uber, Google, or even Uber for that matter. A lot of people had an opportunity to invest in Uber and they passed, and I'm sure now today they're kicking themselves that they didn't invest in Uber. And any other stock or investment or anything that you could have gotten, while it was cheap. You guys gotta forgive me. My daughter went to town on this Nintendo Mini. So I'm saying all that to say that if you want to just enjoy the hobby, right, there's ways that you can enjoy it for real cheap. The most expensive Mini over here right now is probably either going to be one of these two. I can't remember how much the SNES Mini goes for these days. I think maybe about 100. I know the Genesis Mini 2 goes for about 100. These two probably in the 70s or 80s. I don't know. I don't look up the prices for these things, so I don't know what they go for anymore. I know the Neo Geo Mini is super cheap. It's like $40. And what's crazy is that this is probably like has the best value. That Neo Geo Mini is like sick. The games on it are just retarded. Like it's crazy. Yeah, so if you just want to enjoy the hobby, if you just want to relive the moments, if you want to bask in the nostalgia, then go the mini route. Definitely get some minis and have a blast. But there is a viable collecting community that does see the monetary value in these games, and there will always be people who will pay up for it. The same way there will always be people who will pay up for a Michael Jordan rookie card, the same way there will be people who will pay up for a Jackie Robinson original baseball jersey. There will just always be those people. And the best thing that you can do is, instead of reminiscing or looking back and saying, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, look at the things that you enjoy now and invest in those things. Don't buy things because you think they're going to be expensive in the future. Buy things that you love and give you value, and take care of them and hold on to them. And you know what? If you do that, perhaps maybe, yeah, when you're old and gray and you no longer are using that thing that you still love, but you just don't use it anymore, yeah, maybe it'll be worth a few thousand or a few $100,000. I've got cars that I've had since I was in my 20s. And I'm not that old. So, I'm not super old, but I've got cars that I've had for decades now. And I don't have them just because I like hoarding cars, but I never really had a reason to sell But, you know, if I keep these cars long enough, you know, 20, 30 years from now, if they're still running, someone might, they're going to be vintage cars 30, 40 years from now. They won't be as vintage as a 1960 whatever, but they'll still be vintage. They'll still be old. And, you know, when I'm in my 60s, if that's something that I still have in a working condition, it'll be worth more than probably what it's worth today. So there's two sides to the hobby. It's a dichotomy. Think about how you want to enjoy it and just go enjoy it. And if you want to collect, collect. If you don't, you don't. But just keep in mind, there is an emotional aspect to it, and there is that dopamine aspect to it. And these are things that we cannot ignore. Let me know what you think about all of these concepts. Let me know what you think about all of these thoughts. It's the Y2K Collector. Hopefully you had a strong Monday. You're starting the week off strong, positive, right? And it's a productive week for you. It's getting into that fall season. I don't know if you guys can feel it, but that chill is in the air. So it's pumpkin spice, everything nice. You know what I'm talking about? Apple cider, all that jazz. Let me know what you got planned. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.